brothers and sisters, or brother and sisters. Okay. Make sure I get that right. I could say brothers, just including myself. But we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, looking at the next section, verse 38 through 42. As we continue on our series of the Sermon on the Mount, to kind of give a little bit of a recap, the whole key verse of the Sermon on the Mount is found right there in chapter 5, verse 20, where Jesus tells them, saying that your righteousness must surpass or exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven. The type of righteousness that the Pharisees had was a self-made righteousness, not a righteousness that was after God's righteousness. It was the righteousness of man, a self-made righteousness where they're all about their outward appearance, while on the inside they were full of hypocrisy and corruption. And so Jesus says that you don't need to be acting like them. You need to have a much deeper righteousness, one that is in connection with God's righteousness, to have a deeper, firmer relationship with Him, one that is true, genuine, authentic, and pure. And He tells them earlier, in regards to the Old Testament, saying that He has not come to destroy the law and prophets, but rather He has come to fulfill them. And so far, He gives about 6 contrasts in regards to showing and proving of His fulfilling the Old Testament. And so far, we've already looked at anger, we looked at lust, we looked at divorce, we looked at oaths, and now we are going to be looking at contrast number 5. Second to the last contrast, found in verse 38 through 42. And this segment right here, the Sermon on the Mount, seems to be a lot of controversy within not just the world, but even within the brotherhood. This segment right here, this text, has caused as much controversy as any in the Sermon on the Mount. The passage is used by enemies of Christianity to say that the teachings of Jesus are idiotic and impossible. It is also a section that perplexes those who desire to follow Jesus. Precisely how should it be applied to our lives? Well, let's go ahead and actually read the text as a whole. Verse 38 through 42. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." Many would-be Christians either ignore the instructions in the passage or end up explaining them away. Now, my challenge is to make the teaching practical without dismissing it. How should a child of God react when he or she is mistreated by others? I've called this sermon tonight, "When You Get Slapped in the Face." When you get slapped in the face. How should a Christian, one who is seeking an authentic and genuine righteousness, one who is to have the righteousness of God, that is to be a deeper, longing relationship with God, how is he to react whenever he or she is slapped in the face? Turn the other cheek. What does it mean by turning the other cheek? Does it mean that we just let people walk all over us? Well, we're going to be discussing that passage here tonight. But I'd like for us to begin with what they were taught. The he begins in verse 38, as he has been doing with the last several contrasts. He says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." This Old Testament teaching is one with which most are familiar. Even those who know nothing else about the Bible are quite familiar with this principle right here. The words are found 3 times in the Old Testament. If you'd like to go ahead and write these passages down, Exodus chapter 21, verse 22 through 25. Leviticus chapter 24, verse 19 and 20. And Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 21. Again, it's Exodus 21, verse 22 through 25. Leviticus 24, verse 19 and 20. And Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 21. So a lot of people tend to bring up the very first question, which would be, why? Why was this command given? These words have been used to excuse everything from personal revenge to family feuds to civil disobedience. Was that why God gave this commandment? For us to take matters into our own hands? When it's regarding a personal vendetta or family feuds or civil disobedience? Is that the reason why he gave this command? No, not at all. Regarding this instruction, several facts must be understood. Number 1, God gave this commandment not to encourage retaliation, but, listen carefully, to limit punishment. He gave this commandment to limit punishment. Prior to this decree, if someone lost an eye, he would often attempt to put out both eyes of the offender and perhaps even take his life. So personal retaliation would often escalate to include entire families or cities or businesses and etc. The decree says an eye, not eyes, for an eye. And a tooth, not teeth, for a tooth. And it's also the other way around. An eye for an eye, not eyes. And a tooth for a tooth, not teeth. So it works both ways. It's singular. It's to limit punishment. And in regards to that, who is the one that executes said punishment? Number 2. It was given to enact justice on the part of someone using their anger to harm someone. These words, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, were not directed to the average individual Israelite, but were intended as a guideline for the Jewish civil courts. I mentioned Deuteronomy chapter 21, or 19, verse 21, but let's go ahead and kind of look at the verses prior to verse 21. Turn with me to Deuteronomy 19, beginning at verse 17. Deuteronomy 19, beginning at verse 17. It says, "Then both parties to the dispute shall appear," here it is, "before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently," that is, to investigate diligently, "and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you," and guess what? Verse 19, that word "you," that is Hebrew second person plural. Saying you all. Who's he talking about? He's talking about the judges and the priests of the civil court. "You shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. And the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Folks, that is the passage on why the commandment was given. It was given to limit punishment so that personal retaliation would not escalate. And it was to enact justice on the victim, giving the justice, or putting the justice into the hands of the judges of the civil court. It's a basic judicial principle that says, let the punishment fit the crime. So, the eye for an eye law was therefore restrictive, not permissive. It was restrictive, not permissive. It is not giving you permission to take matters into your own hands. You are restricted from doing that. Those in charge of enacting justice and limiting punishment, that responsibility is given to the judges in the court system of civil law. And so when we look at the context of Matthew 5, verse 38, he says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So we answered the question, why was the command given to begin with? So now we ask the question, how was the command misused? Because remember, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were the ones teaching the people this right here. And so how were the scribes and Pharisees misusing and abusing this passage? Well, the law of Moses, first and foremost, discourages personal retaliation. We're all familiar with Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, where it says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But you know what the beginning part of that verse says? It says, you shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Nevertheless, the Pharisees and Sadducees used the eye for an eye and the tooth for a tooth passage to say that God approved individual retaliation. And sure enough, again, what was it that they would teach to the people? Their own traditions, their own oral laws, their man-made laws, and whatnot. And a lot of that was from the Talmud. They would teach the Talmud. Again, all those sayings and teachings from the ancient scholars and rabbis, they would put their teachings, their rules, their traditions over the law of God. And what were they teaching? Well, in the Talmud, get this. They taught that there are 5 categories in which a person could take revenge: damage, pain, medical costs, finances, a loss of livelihood, and humiliation. If you are a victim of any of those categories, then you can take personal revenge into your hands. That is from the Bava Kama 83b of the Talmud. That's what they taught. Pretty upsetting, is it not? And sadly, I would say that the passage is still misused today. You know, we give the Pharisees and Sadducees a hard time. I know I do. I give them a hard time. Jesus did. But here's the thing. Sometimes we're no better than the Pharisees and Sadducees. Because the passage is still misused today. Fiery-eyed fanatics bent on harming others spout, after all, the Bible says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Nowhere in Scripture does it ever encourage personal retaliation. And sometimes we try to find ways around it, do we not? We try to find ways to justify ourselves. One of the excuses, and again, it's an excuse that I try to make, that I try to justify whenever I find myself in this kind of situation is, well, I'm teaching that person a lesson. I'm going to give him or her a taste of their own medicine to make sure that they don't do it to anybody else. Is that really the case, or am I just trying to make an excuse so I can retaliate? I'm just trying to make an excuse so I can retaliate. And bless my wonderful wife, who puts up with me in situations like that. And sometimes she just laughs and she goes, "You know you're not going to do nothing." And she's right, I never do nothing. But nowhere in Scripture does it ever encourage personal retaliation. It was a guideline for the civil court system to follow and to help limit punishment so that personal retaliation does not escalate, and to help enact justice. So that's simply what it was. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth principle was a guideline for the civil court system, not for personal individuals like you and I. So, that is what they were taught. But now I want us to look at what Jesus teaches. Verse 39 through 42. He says, "But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil." All right. Right from the start, he is giving us one rule. Do not resist the one who is evil. So right from the get-go, we're kind of thrust into another controversy. So you mean to tell me that do not resist an evil person? Let evil people do whatever they want, wherever they are, to cause chaos? We're just bound to just allow that to happen? That doesn't sound right to me. Well, perhaps the first thing I need to say is that Jesus was not addressing society in general. When he says, "Do not resist the one who is evil," he is not addressing society in general. He was not talking to parents regarding their children. Evil in a child is to be seriously resisted. And on the need for discipline, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 8 and 11. And the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is filled with a lot of discipline as well. Jesus did not have in mind civil governments. God has given government officials the authority to bring wrath on the one who practices evil. Romans chapter 13, verse 4. Jesus was not even giving instructions to congregations. False teachers are not to be tolerated. Matthew chapter 7, verse 15. That's going to be another section we're going to talk about in the Sermon on the Mount when we get there. Anyone who encourages a false teacher participates in his evil deeds. 2 John, verse 11. Okay, well, if he's not speaking to society in general, who was Jesus speaking to? He's speaking to individual disciples like you and I. That's who he's speaking to. He is speaking to us as individual disciples. Jesus was concerned about how we respond when we are personally mistreated. Perhaps the best explanation, what Jesus had in mind, is found in the examples that he gives right here. He gives 4 examples. Number 1, he says, "But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." So, example number 1. Turn the other cheek. A slap on the cheek was considered an insult. 1 Kings chapter 22, verse 24. You look at an example of that. The slap mentioned here in our text is doubly insulting, for it was a backhand slap. Notice what Jesus says. If anyone slaps you on which cheek? The right cheek. How is that doubly insulting? Well, to hit a person on their right cheek, or to slap a person on their right cheek with the right hand, usually requires hitting them with the back of your palm. You have to find a left person in order to do that, but if most people at that time were right-handed people. And so to slap someone on the right cheek, I mean, I wouldn't imagine them doing this. like that. No, they probably just took their backhand and went like that, doubly insulting to the person. A hard slap may be painful, but in most cases it is not life-threatening. It can lead to that. If retaliation escalates, it can lead to that. But a slap across the face, it's painful, very painful. But in most cases, it's not life-threatening. Jesus said, turn the other what? Other cheek to him also. Now at this point, critics began to rant about how Christianity has no concept of the real world. Oh, you can't stand up for your own honor. Oh, you're just a coward, spineless person. That's what the real world is all about. The well-known saying states that a gentleman must protect his honor at all costs. Well, first we need to admit that, yeah, Jesus' teaching goes against real world and modern day philosophy. It does. Why? Because the way God sees things is completely different than the way the world sees things. And which has it right? I believe God is the one that has it right. I know God is the one that has it right. And the path was often an invitation to the duel of death. One man told me, all right, I'll go ahead and turn the other cheek, but afterwards, everybody better prepare themselves because it's probably going to be about the greatest fight that anyone is ever going to see in this county. Oh, so you're willing to turn your other cheek, but after you turn the other cheek, you're still willing to retaliate? That man who told me that missed the whole point of what Jesus is saying. As already noted, a slap on the face is an insult. An insult is a personal affront. Keep that in mind. An insult is a personal affront. The injury that results is not an injury to one's body, but an injury to one's self-esteem. A person gets upset because someone had hurt their feelings. And when someone gets their feelings hurt, they get angry. And when they get angry, they want to retaliate. The principle is this, of what Jesus is basically saying: do not be so concerned about yourself. It's not all about you. Don't get upset so easily. Don't get your feelings hurt too easily, to the point where you're just going to allow it to ruin your mood for the whole day and make you angry and make you be tempted to try to get back at somebody and get even with them and take matters into your own hands. Do not be overly concerned about your so-called rights. Jesus himself was slapped on the face. When you look at Mark chapter 14, verse 65. And yet, never once did he retaliate. Matthew chapter 26, verse 53. By turning the other cheek, your action may touch another person's heart. It may even touch the hearts of those who insult you. I'm always reminded of a time when, and I read about this, I'm not sure if this actually happened, but I wouldn't see why anybody would lie or make this up, but it's just an oral story that was passed down for many generations during the time of Brother Marshall Keeble, when he was holding gospel meetings. And at one particular gospel meeting, when he extended the invitation, one man started charging his way down the aisle. With a smile on his face, Brother Marshall Keeble extended his hand out to shake the guy's hand. But the guy punched Brother Marshall Keeble right across the face so hard that he fell and flipped completely over the communion table, and the guy spat on him. It went completely silent. Everyone stopped singing. Everyone gasped. Brother Marshall Keeble grabbed the microphone. He got up and he said, "I wish I could wipe the anger from your heart and the sin from your soul as easily as I can wipe this spittle from my face. In tears, the man fell on his knees and hugged Brother Marshall Keeble and said that he was sorry. And he came and obeyed the gospel. That's not always the case. It may never always happen like that. But, as my old mentor, Brother Victor Rescue says, you just never know. You never know. Whether or not our action affects the one mistreating us, it will affect us. That is the truth. It may not affect others, but it will affect us. How? It makes us better people. It makes us better people. He goes on to give the second example. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. Now here is one who is wanting to wipe you out to the point that the only thing that you have is the shirt on your back. Now the tunic was the close-fitting garment worn next to the skin, covering the body from the neck to the knees, which they would still wear when they would go to bed to sleep. It keeps them warm. But Jesus says if he takes your tunic, that close-fitting garment to the skin that goes from your neck down to your knees, if he takes that, then give him your cloak as well. Now the outer garment is considered to be the cloak, which poor people used as a blanket. So imagine this. If the man took his tunic, and the tunic is what he wore at night to help keep him warm, at least he would still have this cloak that he could put on as a blanket to help keep him warm. But Jesus says, go ahead and give him your cloak. What's the point that he's trying to make here? The point is this. Jesus says you have two options. You can either return evil for evil by retaliating, taking matters into your own hands, and getting your tunic back yourself, one way or another, either beating the guy half to death and taking your tunic back, or even maybe killing him and taking your tunic back. You can return evil for evil, or you can return evil with good by letting him have your cloak as well. Jesus says that when it comes to his cause, it would be better to be wronged in a court setting than to destroy the reputation of the cause of Christ by retaliating. Is that difficult? Oh, I'm sure it is, yeah. It's easier said than done. I'm going to continue on. So many things that we could talk about these examples, but we'd be here all night. I just really want to kind of get to the gist of it all. But continuing on the next example, verse 41, he says, and if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. So the third example out of the 4 is go the 2nd mile. Now, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, this was a phrase that was used from the Roman soldiers who would have Jews to carry their baggage. Now, this rule was actually installed with a good purpose in mind. It would be after the sense of having a long, tired journey and you just came back from a huge battle. You were able to grab one of the citizens, even a Jew, and have them help carry your baggage a little bit, just kind of help take the load off. It was supposed to be used for a good purpose. But you know how the Romans are towards the Jews. They hated the Jews with a passion. And so they used this as a way to oppress them. And so the Jews had their boundary line, which was to be exactly 1 mile or 1,000 paces. Now the Greek word that's used here for forces says if anyone forces you, that Greek word forces means to impress into service. And it's the same word that's used in Matthew chapter 27, verse 32, regarding Simon the Cyrene, who was pressed into service to help carry the cross for Jesus. Matthew chapter 27, verse 32. As I said, the Romans started abusing this method as a way to mistreat the Jews who they hated so much. So here Jesus says this: go the second mile. Go 2 miles. Again, the options are still the same. You can either get mad, get angry, attack the Roman soldier, beat him half to death, or you can return evil with good and go the second mile. The fourth example, he says, give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. The reason the person begs and wants to borrow is because they are in a tough spot financially. Okay, now, for the longest time, I struggled with this right here. I tried to figure out why, how does verse 42 fit the context of not retaliating? Now, a lot of people have had that same question. What is 42? What is giving to the one who begs, or letting the beggar borrow something? What does that have to do with not retaliating? Well, think of the situation like this. Maybe you have someone who has not been kind to you, coming to you asking for help. How are you going to respond? Are you going to respond with, oh, been waiting for this moment. Look at you. Oh, earlier you were calling me names. You were so arrogant. You were acting like a brat, like a hot shot. Ridiculing my name, mistreating me, slandering my name, mocking me, my family. And look at you. Look how pathetic you look. Here you are, come crawling to your knees, begging me for help. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Oh, you were going to rue this day. Oh, and I'm enjoying it. Yeah, you can respond like that. Or, Jesus says, even though they treated you horribly, you can return evil with good by helping them financially, by letting them borrow what it is that they need to borrow. Maybe, probably not even expected in return. Folks, this, if you're like me, as I said, the more I study the Sermon on the Mount, man, the more it convicts me, and the more help I need from the Lord. A lot of people tend to then, after looking at the contrast of retaliation and the way that we are to respond to it by not retaliating, by not taking it into our own hands, a lot of people then tend to try to throw out arguments like, okay, so you're saying that Jesus said that I cannot defend my family? Well, let me ask you this. Is Jesus talking about defense, or is he talking about retaliation? There's a big difference, folks. If Jesus was talking about defense, then he would have contradicted Exodus chapter 22, verse 2. Where the principle there gives us the right to defend our family in case somebody tries to break in and tries to harm us. We are given that authority from that principle to defend our family in case of situations like that. So Jesus is not talking about defense or defending your family or your loved ones. And also, think of it like this. If he was condemning defense, then that would mean all of our military personnel would be living in sin right now, would they not? That doesn't make any sense. You know why? Because Jesus is not talking about defense. He's talking about retaliation. It also does not mean that you cannot bring in the civil authorities. I mean, if somebody was ridiculing you and disturbing public peace or something like that, and threatening your family and slandering you and causing all types of chaos and drama and heartaches and hardships to you, your family, physically, emotionally, mentally, you can bring in the civil authorities. You have that right to do that. You have that biblical right to do that. The government is used to bring about justice. Romans chapter 12, verse 18, all the way to chapter 13, verse 7. And so, I just wanted to go ahead and say that part towards the end. Jesus is not talking about defense, and he's not talking about how you cannot bring civil authorities into the matter, because you can. All what Jesus is talking about is taking personal vengeance into your own hands. He is saying, don't do it. It's not worth it. It is completely not worth it. It does more harm than good, and it does more damage than healing. So he says, with the 4 examples, the way to overcome it is by returning evil with good. That is going to be the only way you can overcome it. Is returning evil with good. And he's going to get more specific with that within the next segment, the last contrast, which is loving your enemies, verse 43 through 48, which we'll come back for next Sunday evening if the Lord wills. We have struggled to comprehend exactly what Jesus taught in Matthew 5, verse 38 through 42, but it is 10 times easier to understand those verses than it is to obey them. So perhaps you feel as I do. The further I go into Matthew 5, the more difficult Christ's requirements become, and the more I feel the need for God's help. And so, if you feel that way, you're not alone, because so do I. But if you have any need whatsoever, any prayers of strength or encouragement, by all means, I will encourage you to please come forward together as we stand and as we sing number 696. There's a fountain free, 'tis for you and me.